So in part two, I'll talk about my time leading up to my graduation, my enlistment in the military, and my time in up until my deployment to Iraq. And I don't remember, I think I actually was atheist before my confirmation, even though, I'm sorry, I kind of told the confirmation story out of order chronologically, but I actually don't really remember. I think actually I was atheist, and then probably like right after I overcame atheism is probably right around when my mom put me through confirmation. Sorry, my memory isn't that sharp. I'm not even that old either. You know, it's probably 15 years ago, or 12 years ago or something. So then came my high school graduation, and leading up to that, I remember occasionally going to church on my own, and kind of just sitting in the back, and I was kind of disconnected at that point. One issue too is, when the family starts to kind of break up religiously, then if you decide to keep going to church and you're the only one there, and it's very different than when you used to go when you're younger as a family, right? People start kind of breaking off and becoming very secular, and yeah. And that's Minnesota as well. Minnesota is one of those kind of like more liberal states. I believe towards the cities it becomes very like Democrat. As you move out towards the countryside, it becomes more Republican. But the education system is very, it's just like really probably all of America. It's very liberal. Again, like I was talking about earlier, they push certain ideas on the children and stuff, which are like really old ideas actually, but it feels like you're all new and hip and you're so educated, and those religious people are so backwards, and and you kind of feel like that as you go through it, especially when you're just totally unequipped to deal with these types of ideas, to deal with things like evolution, and well, if you believe in the Bible, but then there's evolution, well, how can you believe in the creation of Adam if you also believe in evolution? And the church didn't do a very good job of addressing those types of concerns. Maybe nowadays things are different, but this is back in like the 2000s and even like the late 90s probably. So yeah, that's one thing the church is still probably coming to grips with is the secularism and the emptying out of their churches, really. A lot of these churches have a fraction of their attendees that they had 30 years ago, And so by the time I graduated, I guess I was like one of the lone stragglers there, still trying to go to church at least occasionally. And to me, it just became a very, I felt in my life a little bit isolated maybe. And from there, I guess it just became more of a personal relationship with God. I remember at times as well, one time I was in my bedroom just thinking about God. I was like, what is he? Does he not know things? Does he know everything? There's some basic concepts in our creed, like God knows everything. He knows universals, he knows particulars, he knows these types of things. But again, it's not like I had a copy of the Catechism of the Catholic Church or St. Thomas Aquinas sitting on my bookshelf or anything like that. So it's just totally unequipped. It was just like pure, whatever my intellect can conjure up at any moment when it came to my, experience and dealings with God early on. I remember just thinking about that, and I was like, I really wonder, like, what is God? Is he big? Is he, where is he? Is he, I just sat back thinking about these things, and I just had no answers, really. One thing about the Bible, too, is it has some kind of anthropomorphic ideas in it. There's other parts in, like, the Old Testament which have concepts that God knows universals, that he doesn't know particulars, or that, like, he didn't see Adam doing something, like as if he is not all-seeing. But of course in Islam, Allah is al-Basir, Allah is all-seeing, he sees everything, nothing escapes him. He's al-Alim, he knows everything, nothing escapes his knowledge. But you don't have these concepts, even in even if I had read the Bible, these concepts aren't there. I had no clear belief of who is God or what is God, but I just had some, I knew that God existed. And beyond that, I just didn't know much more than that. I knew that, you could pray to him, and that prayer can improve your situation and stuff like that. Beyond that, I was very naive. And so when I graduated from high school, I had decided to join the military. And that was actually during my senior year in high school when I made that decision. I think around like December. from all the media going on, right, promoting the military, all the recruiting going on. You had recruiters visit our high school, right? And then I had a friend go and join the Army, but I was still 17. I wasn't 18 yet. And I was thinking the Marine Corps, Army, not sure. And, you know, he was like, I can't remember what he said. He said something about, like, the Marines are arrogant or something. Like, the Army is, like, I don't remember. He said something like that, and I was like, okay. So I went to the Army recruiting station. Of course, once you go to the Army recruiting station, try to get you to recruit other people to come to the Army recruiting station. So, you know, and they will even promote you, you know, from the first rank of private to the next rank of private early on, if you can get, you know, someone to come in and you can do these training videos and stuff. So there's incentives to help the Army recruit. But I went to the Army recruiting station, and this is probably like December, you know, like 2009 or something like that. And I remember sitting there and just going through all the MOSs, all the jobs available. And the one that I really wanted, it was a helicopter mechanic. I was like, okay, cool. So like from there, they told me, like, some people, if they want to, they can, you know, reclass and become like a pilot, or they can become like a door gunner or other jobs. And I like helicopters. You know, that sounds fun, I guess. You know, become a mechanic, and also you develop kind of like a mechanical skill that can develop into other careers in your future and stuff like that. So I was like, yeah, I'll do like helicopter mechanic, yeah. And he's like, okay. He's like, are you 18 yet? I'm like, no, I'm 17. He's like, okay. He's like, so you need your mom's signature in order to join the Army if you're only 17. That once you're 18, you can join on your own, but if you're only 17, you can enlist with your parents' signature. And I was like, oh, okay. So I took this paper back to my mom, and she was not happy happy about it, and did not agree with it at all. And I was like, oh, okay. And she was like, no, I'm not going to support you in that. And I was like, oh, man. I was like, okay. I was like, I just want to be a helicopter mechanic. I mean, is that like a big deal? I mean, you know, it's not like I'm trying to be infantry, you know. And so I was like, well, fine. I'm like, you know, Mom, I want to do this, so I'm just going to wait until my birthday next year, and then I'm going to enlist on my own. And then she totally disagreed with me and kept trying to dissuade me from it. Then came my like right after graduation came my birthday. And a couple days later, you know, I went back to the recruiting station, and I was like, hey, you know, they're like, oh, hey, I remember you. Yeah, you know, it's been like 6 months or something. And they're like, yeah, have a seat. I was like, okay. And it's like, I'm 18 now. They're like, all right. And then I was like, okay, well, what jobs are available now? I'm like, I can still get that one, right? He's like, no. He's like, that one's long gone. Sorry. I was like, oh, really? Yeah, like, well, what's left? And he's like, let me look. And he goes on his computer and he looks up what's available. And there were like 6 jobs available. There was infantry. All of them are like combat arms jobs. There's infantry. There was the cavalry scout. There was a tanker. There was combat engineer. I think there might have been combat medic. I think that's about all that there was. And I was like, okay, I don't think I want to be a medic. Like, what's a combat engineer? And he explained it to me, and I was like, that's kind of interesting. I guess it's still like closer to like mechanical stuff that I wanted to do, I guess, you know. And I was like, well, how long is the training? He's like, it's like a whole year. I was like, no, I don't want to train for a whole year. That's way too long. I was like, never mind, forget about that. And I was like, okay, what's left? And he's like, infantry or cavalry or tanker. I'm like, a tanker is not my thing, you know. I was like, the other two. I was like, what's an infantry? What's the difference between infantry and a cavalry scout? I haven't even heard of cavalry scout before. Like, what is that? And in the recruiting office, there was one guy who was actually 11 Bravo. He was infantry. And there's another guy who was a 19 Delta, a cavalry scout. And then the infantry guy, you know, scoots back in his chair. He's like, oh, yeah, the infantry. He's like what I was doing. And he's like, we were doing, you know, foot patrols and stuff like that in Iraq and whatever and yada, yada, yada. And I was like, okay. And then I was like, well, what's the cavalry scout? And then the guy's like, well, we were in Humvees driving around, you know, doing reconnaissance and whatever. And I was like, I still don't really understand what a cavalry scout is, but I guess I'll just go ahead and do it, and I'll go see for myself what it is. And I was like, it sounds slightly more interesting than infantry. And they were like, okay. And they signed me up and all that. And I went home and, you know, I told my mom, and I was like, well, you know, looking back, I was like, you know, Mom, maybe you should have signed this, because I would have been a mechanic, and now I'm combat arms because you didn't sign it. But as they say in Islam, qadr Allah, decree of God. This is what He willed. But yeah. After that, between that, I had like 6 months between signing up and actually going to my training and beginning my time in service. And I remember my mom went and like enrolled me in a college and stuff, and was like trying to convince me to just go to college, but I was like, no, I don't want any debt or anything like that, And yeah, unfortunately, I guess it kind of worked against her there, but. Yeah. And at that time as well, I'm not exactly the best kid ever. I was like, if I just go to college, like I'm still so naive. I don't know anything about the world. I felt like the Army was an opportunity for me to learn a bit about the world and develop myself a bit before I go on and kind of like start my life. And alhamdulillah, this is what Allah decreed, and here's where I am, and perhaps this is what was best. So then I went to MEPS after I enlisted. And MEPS is military entrance processing station. It's where you go like when you enlist, and you go to like the next steps where they evaluate you and see if you're somebody who is like fit for military service. Interestingly, because of the war on terror, though, they actually kind of relaxed their standards a little bit, especially with like mental health screenings, unfortunately. And some of those like war crimes you saw over the years were actually, some of them were done by people who actually weren't normally cleared by MEPS, but they got a waiver for like mental health and stuff. Little side note there. Anyway, so I went to MEPS, and there's like a basic psych evaluation, like asking you like basic stuff like, how do you feel? Like, I don't know, stuff like that. Like really basic psychology questions. I'm like, I feel normal. I don't know. Just gotta answer them just a bunch of normal questions. I guess I'm a normal guy. I don't know. And at the end, it's like, signs the paper, he hands it to me. I'm like, okay. They take all your fingerprints and stuff like that, I guess in case you commit a crime. That way the JAG attorneys and stuff like that can investigate you better, I'm assuming, is why they do that. And then there's the medical evaluation, which is so notorious at MEPS. They check you like head to toe, basically, and then they do, I can't remember what they call it, like the military Olympics or something they call it, where they have everybody like in like their underwear in a room, and you're all lined up, and then this doctor comes in and he like tells you to do these random things, like duck walking and like swinging your arms in circles, and like making sure that nobody has like a prior injury essentially that could like hamper their service, or that they're trying to hide, right? That's one thing. Interestingly, my recruiter told me before I went to MEPS, he's like, look, let me be honest. He's like, do you have any prior injuries? And he's like, look, if everybody was honest in their application and they wrote down every injury they ever had, he's like, almost nobody would get into the military. He's like, we're going to just leave out whatever injury you had, we're going to leave it out. And, and when you go to MEPS, don't tell them anything. Otherwise, you're not going to get in. And I was like, okay. And I get this, tell everybody this, the recruiter, right? And one thing about the recruiters is, it's like the Army, especially again because of the war on terror. And granted, I'm at like the latter part of the war on terror. It reaches peak like around 2007, 2008, and this is like 2010. So by now it's kind of wound down a bit. But for recruiters, though, their jobs became very difficult and stressful because the Army just put these really high recruiting numbers on them that were like really hard to meet, especially the questionability of the war on terror. You go to California as a recruiter, you're probably not going to get very far, right? So these recruiters, they all developed their tips and tricks and things like that to push as many people as they could through MEPS and get them in the military. And so that's where like a lot of this stuff comes from, is they're just trying to meet their numbers that the Army put, that the honchos put on them. These are your minimum targets, and if you don't hit them, then it's gonna look bad on your record, type of stuff. And so then like at MEPS, you go and you do these different things. Finally, you pass or whatever. And then Yeah, I won't even tell you the horrors of MEPS. No, no, it wasn't that bad. It was just kind of like strange. I remember at one point at MEPS too, though, you sat down and then they all told you about, there's like a something kind of like pasted against a wall with like this stuff written on it that talks about like desertion and, you know, stuff like that. And it's some NCO or whatever who walks in and he's like, and if you know, there's the difference between desertion and whatever and these other things. And like, if you know, desert, then this is the maximum punishment. You could be executed. If you, you know, do this, you could be, you know, he basically tells you like the maximum consequences of that you accept if you join the military. That, you know, if you take your weapon and you desert on the battlefield, then you could be executed and stuff like that. And it's just like, kind of like lump in your throat, swallow, like, okay, like I will not do that. Okay then, all right. And then just tons and tons and tons of paperwork after that. I don't even remember, like these dizzying, you know, quantities of paperwork, sitting in like this room, and there's all these other people, and it's like a classroom, and they're like just going, you know, like two hours of just sitting there signing paperwork, and the guy's like, every signature has to be like perfect, you know, you cannot have a single error. If you make a mistake, let us know, because we have to come up and you have to correct it, and then you have to initial and like date the correction. And I was like, oh man. So you have a pen and you're like signing stuff and you're like hoping I'm making a mistake. And so I make a mistake, like, oh, I made a mistake. And the guy walks up and he's like, okay, initial there, sign there. Okay, that's good. It's like 2 hours of just signing and signing, you know, I don't know how long. And then you go and I sit down with another guy, and it's like one-on-one at a desk, and then like I digitally sign all these documents, so many things, like an hour straight of just signing stuff, and explaining this is what this means, this is what this means, this is what this means. And so after MEPS, I'm just like, okay, now I'm just waiting to start my training. So I worked, I was a smoothie guy at the mall. Anyways, let's skip that. So then I left for my training that winter. And I remember when on the way there, my recruiter was like, don't worry, you know, everything's gonna be okay, or whatever. He's a pretty nice guy, actually, very chill guy. I get on this plane, and like, again, I'm just sitting there thinking, like, I have no idea what's about to happen. Then I fly, I get in there, I get into Fort Knox, Kentucky. We go and we check in at like what they call reception. So you spend a week at this place called reception, or like 2 weeks or so, where they kind of like give you your uniforms and equipment and do some more paperwork and processing, and teach you some really basic stuff before they actually send you the actual like training. And then it's like super late at night, probably like 11 p.m. I get off the plane and I go over, I get on this bus, and all of us get on this bus, whatever. We drive over to the base, and we're like, I wonder, and people were on the bus, and they were like, you know, I wonder if there's not gonna be any drill sergeants yet. We're just gonna be kind of like chill for like a day. As soon as the bus pulls up, we just see a drill sergeant right outside, and then some of them were like, oh. It's kind of funny. And then we're expecting like some yelling and stuff like that, but this dude was actually like really, really chill. Because like when the drill sergeants are actually like ending their time as a drill sergeant and they're going back into the regular army, a lot of them, they go through this reception again. And this dude was like super, super chill, actually. Like, I don't think I ever saw him yell or even get angry. He was actually, I think he was probably texting someone like most of the time, like one of those flip phones that has like the keyboard on it. He spent most of his time like on that, actually. He just look up and be like, okay guys, so you're gonna go stand over there and you're gonna do this, whatever, and then all right. And he'd just look at his phone, he'd be like texting probably some girl or something, I don't know. Or his wife, or I don't know how old he is or whatever. And then we just go like, oh, like, okay, this guy's kind of chill. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know how to like stand or like how to address a drill sergeant. I knew like absolutely nothing when I got there. And some people, their recruiters had taught them some basic stuff, like here's parade rest, here's this, you know, like I didn't even know any of that. Like I was just like, felt so like I was just waiting to get smashed, you know, get ready to get in trouble, you know. But then we just like went through in the night, like going from getting these blankets and whatever. And this dude would just look up and he'd be like, all right, so you walk through here, you need to pick up your pillow, your pillowcase, your this, your that. And then you go and get in the other line. He's like, all right. Like, okay, yeah. He's like, okay, whatever. He flips over his phone again and starts texting. I was like, dang, this is like way different than I thought. Then the next couple of days is when we met the other drill sergeants and it became more Army-like, right? So basic training was kind of interesting though. One thing I remember was kind of interesting when we were finally learning how to like handle a weapon and how to shoot a weapon, the M4. We went to this like digital range where they give you like an air weapon, and like you're learning how to zero your weapon and do these different things, and that was the first time I'd ever been called a man. All right, I was 18 years old, and this like really big guy was like walking up and down the line, and whenever we were like just not doing well, which is like the whole first half of it, he'd be like, come on man, focus. And I was like, dang, I'm a man now? I didn't even know that. I remember that was kind of fun. I was like, man, like I'm a man? Like dang, I never been called a man before, like I'm like 18 years old, just got out of high school like that year, or like, yes, maybe like a year ago, whatever. And I was like, man, all right, I guess I need to grow up a little bit faster. That was kind of funny. There's a number of other good experiences in basic training that are kind of good. Other times it was kind of difficult, and trying to get things right and learn things, and physically challenging. I remember the sleep was very difficult at first. Like you only got like 4 hours of sleep a night, and just kept compounding. And then the whole day you're just doing all these things, and you're so tired, and you're moving physical. It's very physical. You're always standing, and then you're marching, and then they come up and they're like, hey, we need to move all this stuff, and then you're like. It's like a really physical job, then you only get like 4 hours of sleep, and you're just so incredibly like mind-blowingly tired. And then you're sitting in a classroom for an hour or two, and they're like trying to teach you something, and then people are falling asleep, and they all get in and start yelling, and they make you jump up and start exercising. And then you're just like fighting sleep like the whole time, like trying so hard to concentrate. And that actually stuck with me after the Army. Like sometimes, like if I'm just in my normal day, and I feel kind of tired, like if I'm in the back of someone's car and I start falling asleep, like I'm like alert for a second. I'm like, oh dang, I should be sleeping here. And I'm like, wait, dang, I'm not in the Army anymore. I put my head back down. I'm like, I can sleep right now. Yeah. One thing too about basic training I remember is that they gave us like these Bibles that you could take. It was optional, but I remember going to like a room and they were like, if you want, you can take a Bible, you can take this, various religious paraphernalia, available to you. I took like a rosary, and I took this little like pocket Bible. And actually, I still have that little pocket Bible. Interestingly enough, it was a New Testament from like Gideon International or something like that, which is like an evangelical organization that prints Bibles like for the military and proselytizing and stuff like that. And I kept that like in my pocket. It like perfectly fit in my pocket and stuff. Occasionally when I was like waiting around, I'd pull it out and start reading it. And people generally in the military are kind of respectful of religion for the most part. Like a lot of the drill sergeants, like especially later on, sometimes they wouldn't even really care. Like if you're standing around and you just like someone cracks open their Bible and starts reading it, oftentimes they didn't even care, even though you're not supposed to be like doing anything but standing and looking straight forward. Then other ones would be like, hey, if you don't read your Bible, read it this evening, during your personal time, which is like even an hour in the evening to, write a letter or, whatever, brush your teeth, stuff like that. And sometimes that, just resulted in a drill sergeant coming out and telling people to exercise and stuff. But that Bible actually was quite helpful to me, especially later on in my time in the Army. Eventually I read the whole thing cover to cover, and that was a couple, like 2 years later, and that was the first time I ever actually read the Bible cover to cover. And I do appreciate them for offering that, actually. Apparently, I've learned since that there is a little bit more of like, kind of like Protestantism or like evangelicalism that's perhaps, leaning that way in the military. It's kind of promoted a little bit more, as I've heard, but I was probably too naive to really notice that or anything. And again, to me, Christianity was just Christianity, and it was just, God was God, and that's all that really mattered to me. So that was actually very helpful. And the rosary, I think especially a lot of Muslims like perhaps don't understand or or maybe have some misconceptions about like what a rosary is to like a Christian, you know. It's not like you know, it's a bunch of beads, and then on the beads is like a cross, right? And a lot of them will think of it as like some sort of like, you know, almost like an idol in its own right, but not really. You know, it's just a symbolism of somebody's faith. You know, that's all that really is. You know, and with regards to why they put a cross on it, I'm actually not even really sure. I guess to remind you of the, you know, passion of the Christ and you know, the sacrifice of Jesus, stuff like that, I guess. But really, all it is just like a symbolism. And on the rosary, you'll say like Catholics in particular will say like a series of prayers and stuff like that. But I didn't have anything like that available to me. So to me, it was just like a symbolism and like a reminder. It was mainly, I use it just as a reminder that, hey, you know, God exists. You know, like there's a little bit more going on here in the world. Once in a long while, I'd pull it out and I just remember like, oh yeah, there is a God. You know, with all the rampant, you know, secularism going on in our modern world, it's once in a long while pulling out and thinking about God. It's like almost like a dhikr, as we call it, a remembrance of God in itself, but just having it as like a reminder. So that's really all that it is. At least that's what it was to me. And so that was very helpful. And so then after basic training, I went to what you call your unit, which is where you'll spend your time in the regular Army. And so they sent me to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. I remember at the end of our basic training, after we graduated and stuff like that, everybody got like a letter saying where the Army had like put you. And certain people went to like training battalions where like they had no chance of deploying, you know, and other people like me and other guys went to different units. You know, some people went to like, you know, all kinds of different places really. And we all kind of said our goodbyes and we're like, after our training and all that. I remember as well at our graduation, apparently there was like a punch bowl. I wasn't actually in that room because there's so many families there and people there at this big graduation dinner thing. But apparently there was like a punch bowl, and which is like really heavily intoxicating, like heavy alcohol. And apparently the drill sergeants at the end have like a tradition where when they graduate a class, they go and get extremely intoxicated and compete, or I guess in alcoholic debauchery, or I don't know. And so then after this graduation, we were like this dinner or whatever. We were back in our barracks, and then one of our drill sergeants had come out, and he was like calls us to what's called ready line, which is where everybody comes up in the hallway and like stands against the wall. And he goes walking up and down, and it could just reeks of alcohol. And he said like basically like what he gave like a speech, and he was basically talking about how like none of this stuff, guys, like all this dumb yelling and whatever. He was like none of that matters anymore. He's like, we're going to war, and he like puts his arm up, whatever, and he's like, now who's coming with me? And we were like, we are, drill sergeant. And the point of it really was like, hey, like you're no longer some basic training private, like you know you're in the regular Army now, like kind of chill out. There's no hostility between you trainees and us drill sergeants anymore. There's not like any kind of hostility between us. You know, now we're just kind of NCOs, and you guys are, you know, enlisted people, and we're like a team and all that. And it was kind of a motivating speech, you know, lots of yelling. And this guy, throughout the training, he has a voice that was actually so loud, even without a microphone or anything. It's his normal voice. He was kind of a tall guy. His voice was so loud, he could actually like, you could feel the walls like vibrating, like when he would yell so loud in the hallway. And by the end of it, you're so used to the yelling, like you can actually like kind of, if you're in the back and they can't see you, you might even like be like kind of smiling and giggling as they're like yelling and stuff. You know, it's just like, whatever, it's white noise, you know. I'm used to this. But yeah, his voice was so loud, you could hear the walls like vibrating and kind of shaking from his voice. It was very impressive, actually. And everyone's voice, one thing about the voice is like when you practice with it, when you warm it up and stuff like that, your vocal cords will get better and stronger, and you can project your voice louder and longer, and you can hit different octaves. And so by the end of 15, 16 weeks of training, everybody's voice was actually pretty loud. So that was actually kind of interesting about him. So then from there, like the next day or whatever, we all got our letters out and we're like, saying our goodbyes and stuff, and like, oh, where'd you go, and whatever. And then I got Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, and I was like, all right, haven't heard of that place, but all right. I get there and there's like these mountains and stuff. It's actually a very beautiful city. The first year you're there, you feel like there's nothing to do. Then once you start learning more about the city, it's actually a really awesome city. There's like rock climbing, there's like so much cool stuff to do there actually. Tons of nature to explore, a lot of really good hiking. There's the Carlsbad Caverns and stuff. It's actually a really awesome place once you really get to know it. And if you're into Latino food, Latin American food and culture, El Paso has its own kind of unique kind of Tex-Mexy blend of that. And the greatest restaurant that we found there was called Rafa's Burritos. So if you're ever in El Paso, it's not halal though, so unfortunately we'll have to start our own. But yeah, so I got to that unit there in El Paso in Fort Bliss, and this is where I spent my time in service there, and I never transferred away from that base. So then as soon as I get to my unit and we go through some in-processing, and then our NCOs, your non-commissioned officers, like your kind of frontline leadership, they tell us like, so just so you know, by the way, we're deploying like this summer to Iraq. And I was like, oh, okay. And at that point it was like February, it was like March. And I was like, okay. He's like, and then next month we're going to Fort Warren, California, which is called NTC, and we're going to be training to go to Iraq. And I was like, oh, okay, that was very quick. All right. I thought I'd spend like, 6 months, a year, something like that at my unit, and then be ready to go. But I was like, no, like you're going and like training like a month, and like in 4 months you're going to be in Iraq. I was like, okay. And so like that first month before NTC, like there was some kind of like, people talking trash to you, telling you you're dumb or stupid or whatever, and you're ugly, and like, just random insults just because you're new, hazing type of stuff. But it wasn't really that bad, and it never really turned violent. I was like really jacked at that time too, so I don't think anybody would want to get violent with me. No one really messes with like the swole guy, I noticed though after NTC though, all that stopped. I'd earned a basic level of respect, I guess. And then came NTC, and here's where I started getting more interest a little bit in basic Arab culture, because it's like, well, you're about to go to Iraq, you should learn a couple words in Arabic, you should learn a little bit about Arab culture, even though I don't know anything. So I'm like, well, I'd like to learn. And I handed out like these CDs and like some like little booklets and stuff, which taught you like some basic Arabic phrases and a couple basic things about Arab culture or whatever. A lot of it was like kind of way off. At the same time, some of it was actually kind of helpful. Like one thing it said was don't do anything with your left hand. It was like, just shake hands with your right hand, point with your right hand, don't do anything with your left hand. Like don't point your feet at anybody. Like how to not disrespect people, accidentally, because we're not exactly like super cultured people as Americans, and especially as like enlisted American soldiers. We're like not exactly the most educated people in the world, right? And so I remember listening to some of these Arabic CDs, and it was like, and had like a list of like phrases and stuff. But I was just like, looking back, I learned like totally off pronunciation. Like I had no idea what I was saying. I'm like, I'm good. It's a good thing I never had to use any of those phrases, because no Iraqi would have understood a word that I said. But I gained an interest in the Arabic language though from that. I was like, I really wonder, I really would like to learn how to actually speak this language and learn this language one day. And alhamdulillah, looking in front of me, there's a book in Arabic that I'm working on. Alhamdulillah, I've come a long way with this language, and I'm still learning it. But what's that's where it really sparked my interest though in the Arabic language. I was like, actually, I really would like to actually learn this language one day. And then I'm at NTC, which is where there's like this big kind of operation thing going on. You have like an opposing force they call the OPFOR, which is other like Americans and stuff mostly, and you're all kind of operating in like this big fake war game. and you have like these lasers, and you kind of like shoot blank rounds at each other, and play like war games, kind of to just train and get used to walking around with a weapon and with, you know, a bunch of blank rounds, and, you know, make sure that you guys have like a basic level of performance and coordination, so you kind of have a gist of like what you're doing downrange. It was quite fun. For me, they put me on like some kind of like intel type of thing. I don't want to get into many details about it. I'm not even sure what all is. It's probably not a big deal to talk about all of it, actually, but I don't want to accidentally say something that like is like, you know, secret or whatever. But they put me on some kind of like an intel thing, where I learned like how to do some basic intel collection, how to like, you know, put somebody's data into a computer and stuff like that, and collect, you know, biometric data of potential of people, right, and then tracking them, whatever. That's basically what I learned, and then I learned some other intel work, you know, and how to like give people briefings and stuff like that. And so I guess that, you know, maybe relieved like the high level intel guys from like lower level duties, and then we could focus on that upfront type of, you know, thing. And I think we were supposed to be going out. It was like kind of an experiment, really. I think we were supposed to be going out with like the line guys and collecting intel throughout normal mission operations, but the result is that that whole idea was just quipped later anyway, cast aside anyways. It doesn't work, just throw it aside. And so the whole thing was just, you know, scratched anyways, and I just went back to just doing regular headquarters stuff, which is like sitting on the radio, you know, in the end. And that's what I spent most of my time in Iraq doing, was just sitting on the radio. An experience I had at NTC when I was sitting in this, what you call like operation center thing, which is basically a tent with like some computers and whatever in there. There was a guy from like the Army Reserves, and so the Army Reserves will spend like a month out of the year at like NTC or Fort Polk like training, or like 2 weeks or something like that. I think it was just like 2 weeks, and they just kind of renew like some basic training, and then they go back to working like do their civilian job. And so this dude was kind of like, I guess you'd call it a little bit more nerdy, a little bit more chill. And he was intel as well, actually. And he was sitting there reading a book called like World War Z, which is kind of an interesting book. I actually bought it myself and read it later on. But I was talking to him about Iraq, and I was like, "You been to Iraq before?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "What is it like?" You know, like, I don't know. And he started just telling me some basic stuff, and like, he was actually a pretty cool guy. I'd love to meet him again one day, though I doubt that's possible. But he's actually a pretty chill guy, and I noticed like, you know, he was telling me things to kind of relieve some typical biases and like, you know, misconceptions about Iraqis and about Arabs and Arab culture and stuff like that. And he was like, yeah, you know, it's normal, you know, this is what their society is like, and this and that, and yada yada, and like, and I was like, are they like, you know, like pretty intelligent people or like what, you know? He's like, yeah, of course they are, man. He told me like how ancient Babylon and like, you know, math equations and stuff came out of like old Iraq and all that. He was like, yeah, so all these people are very intelligent, you know, some of them are very smart people. And I was like, oh, okay. And I just had all these like very ignorant biases in my head and misconceptions about Iraqis, and he just helped to kind of address a lot of those. So one thing too is like Muslims in particular tend to have a lot of misconceptions about the U.S. military, and they think, you know, when you see a uniform, you tend to just see the uniform, and you don't see the person. Like I remember in basic training, one of our drill sergeants told us that when we were actually doing some training, like doing like an operation in like this like mock village type of thing, like a mock city type of thing. One thing one of our drill sergeants told us, his name was Drill Sergeant Davis. He was like, when people see you, he's like, they see a uniform, they don't see Carr, they don't see, you know, Johnson, like, you know, last names on your name tape and stuff. He's like, they don't see whoever, you know, they don't see the person. He's like, they just see a uniform, right? He's like, so you got to be really careful about what you do, your behavior. You got to check your behavior and your actions, because he's like, what can happen, and these are, you know, early Iraq lessons, you know, 2003, 2004, 2005 type of early Iraq. A lot of these drill sergeants had like a ton of experience and had crazy stories, a lot of them. You know, he's like, so what can happen is like, if you go and you commit like a crime or something, like, you know, if this guy goes and commits a crime, he's like, and they take off a bunch of people, He's like, the next thing is that another convoy could come through, and other people could come through, and they have no idea who this other guy is, but they're the ones who get attacked, right? Because of what somebody else did there a year ago, even, and they aren't even out of the country, maybe, right? So when they see you, they just see the uniform. He's like, they don't see the person. He's like, if you make a mistake and you do something dumb, he's like, other people could wind up facing those consequences, right? And he was like, and I think that a lot of the violence you see now in Iraq, he's like, I think some of it at least is from the mistakes that, my generation made of soldiers, 10, whatever, 5, 6 years ago. And so, the things, a lot of misconceptions Muslims have about the military as well is that they're all just a bunch of morons who are, super trigger happy, just want to murder everybody and, hate Muslims and, super whatever. And it's like, the military isn't actually like that. It's very diverse. There's a lot of different people in the military. America is kind of like the melting pot of the world, and the military is like the melting pot of America. There's a lot of different people in the military. There are some people who are, like super Islamophobic. There's other people there who aren't at all, actually, and they're even try to like that guy I talked to at NTC. There's even people like him who try to correct misconceptions about Muslims and about Arabs and quelling just kind of like racism and stuff like that. And so I think that it's important to appreciate the diversity of America and the diversity of the U.S. military. Another thing too, the U.S. military is just they don't really decide what America's foreign policy is. These are the politicians, these are the presidencies, the presidential cabinets who make those decisions. The military just carries it out. And in a perfect world, the military, one thing we say in our soldier's creed is, right, I'm an American soldier, I'm a war member of a team. And the third line is, I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values. I serve the people of the United States, right? In reality, you're kind of a tool at this point of, the whims of the corporatocracy, really. Though most people don't really know that. But in a perfect world, the president is supposed to do what's best for the people of America, which is what a republic is supposed to wind up with, and then the military is supposed to be used in defense and stuff like that to carry out that will or that what's best for the American people. It doesn't really happen that way anymore, but this isn't necessarily the military's fault. The corporatocracy that America has become, it's not necessarily the military's fault that it came down to this. They're just the tool that is being misused. You don't necessarily blame the hammer. You don't blame the gun, right? You blame the one who shot the gun. You blame the one who pulled the trigger. And in reality, if you look at a lot of these, even these particular specific incidents that have happened here and there with the military, you can actually tie them all back to a certain cultural elite in the United States. You can tie it back to the military-industrial complex, to the Bush administration, to the media, spreading Islamophobia, and they did that to promote, to defend Guantanamo Bay, so to prevent Guantanamo Bay from closing, to encourage Americans to support the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, because after that they saw what happened in Vietnam. They didn't want the media to be, just willy-nilly, shooting anti-war film type of stuff day in and day out, and kind of propagandizing anti-war stuff. So when it came to the war on terror, the media became very Islamophobic, very pro-war, to prevent another like Vietnam from happening, where the negative popular opinion of the American public resulted in America's withdrawal from the war. And the Bush administration wanted to prevent that. So a lot of this, even like when you look at specific issues, like even people who've murdered people over in Iraq, not saying that the guy won't be held accountable for his actions on the Day of Judgment, but you can trace those negative assumptions he had about Afghans or Iraqis or whatever. You can trace those negative assumptions that they had, these biases they had, to the media and to these these forces at play in the American public. And you can it's not necessarily not his fault for what he did, but he did part of the, you know, multifaceted reasons that a human being makes a decision. Like part of those, one of those reasons that he perhaps made that decision to, you know, kill innocent people or something, is perhaps the Islamophobia and the even just racism that he was fed by popular media for so many years, you know. So you look at the military, like, you know, they're really just a bunch of effects of the American society and American politics. I don't really think of them necessarily. It's very easy to look at them as like this, you know, wicked, imperialistic force. In reality, though, they're really a bunch of just kind of normal people, and a lot of them don't really know what's actually going on. They're not educated about foreign policy. Some of them are like, a lot of them are like 18, 19, 20 years old. I saw these like infantry guys. Some of them are even just like, you know, maybe 30 years old, but they're not necessarily political scientists, you know. Like, a lot of people are just kind of, quote unquote, just doing their job, you know. And that's the way a lot of history kind of is in general, you know. I'm sure if you went to an average, you know, Wehrmacht, you know, German army soldier back in 1938, you know, in World War II, and you were like, hey, what do you think about the Nazi Party? What do you think about France? What do you think about XYZ? You'd probably be like, I don't know, you know. I'm 18 years old, I don't know. He'd probably just be like, yeah, I'm just doing my job, you know, or maybe he has some nationalistic feelings, which are no doubt promoted to for purposes of loyalty. But beyond that, a lot of them are just like, I'm just kind of doing my job. I don't really know. Again, not to defend their actions, but it's important to put things in context and understand that human beings are multifaceted, and understand that the real complaint should lie at the, you know, people moving the chess pieces, and not just blaming the chess pieces, right? You know, these chess pieces, these soldiers are extremely, a lot of them are very naive, very uneducated, and some of them are pretty educated, and some of them don't even really agree with the war either. I mean, I remember when I was one of the other guys at Fort Bliss, like he believed that 9/11 was an inside job, even, you know, like he's like, yeah, like some of them don't even agree with it, you know, at all. It's just kind of like, you know, just making some money here and getting the GI Bill to go to college and then getting out of here. And that's the way it was for some people, you know. So I just hope we can appreciate the diversity of America a bit, which really should give us a lot of hope, you know. With people like that, you know, there's a lot you can work with. There's a lot of potential there. So yeah.